This video will cover the electronics and lighting aspect of the Rock-afire restoration. To start, in terms of the control system my show runs off of, I used the original gray box controller that came with my show. It was fairly flawless and didn't require much restoration work. The original lighting controllers also came with my show, and I had a massive RAF panel. But I didn't want to use either of these as I didn't like the way they were designed and wanted to make something modular. I wanted to create a lighting controller that could be easily transported, since I was used to transporting my characters to the Maker Faire. This lighting controller would have outlets in the box instead of having cables wired directly into it. This would make it easy to move, and I could even change what each outlet went to if I wanted to. Once I had this idea, my friend Kanan designed a board that used triacs to control each of the individual lights. We would be able to fit up 20 triacs per board, meaning we could control up to 20 outlets. There are 40 separate lighting functions in the Rock-afire show, not including the organ and sign, so we would only need 2 boards. However, due to fear of heat transfer, we decided to only use 10 triacs per board. And even with this change, the form factor was still very small. We began to do work on the lighting controller very early on. In July of 2020, I purchased 3 metal housings to store the boards. The floor lights, top lights, and spotlights would each have a separate box. We began to drill out the holes for the outlets, and I was able to find strange circular outlets on eBay to fit in the holes. Once we drilled out the holes and installed the outlets in the first box, we did not work on it again until more than a year later. We began work again in September of 2021 when I started construction on the stage. Kanan and I installed the boards in the box, and he wired half the outlets. We didn't work on this again until I started installing the lights. On December 21st of 2022, I installed the center stage top lights. On January 16th of 2023, I installed Billy Bob's. And on February 7th, I installed Rolf's. I used the original light fixtures that came with the show. And during this period, we finished the first lighting box so we could begin testing them. Alright, so Kanan is helping me. We're wiring Billy Bob's stage, the top lights, top colored lights. And so that's Kanan is just wiring them all together, all the different colors. He's wiring those together. And then there's one wire that will go down for each color type. Kanan is also building a nuclear bomb. What's the most painful electricity shock that you've had?
Oh, the emo controller.
What happened there?
I touched something inside of it. It was like a transformer, and it made the breakers in my house trip.
And so we are currently wiring Billy Bob's stage. We're putting a wire up for each of the 4 colors. On March 28th, I started experimenting with the floor lights. Unfortunately, most of the sockets in the floor fixtures did not work, so I had to replace them. Alright, so what I'm doing right now is I am taking apart some of the light sockets that came with the show originally. What I've found has happened is the tab in the very center is worn down, and I've even tried kind of repairing it in some cases. But it's just very spotty. If I move the socket around at all, the light will flicker. And so what I'm doing is I'm replacing some of the sockets with a newer, this is not actually the one I'm using, but this is a newer socket. I'm keeping the actual housing because that's important, but I'm just going ahead and replacing the socket itself. And what I'm having to do is, so this is actually one of the newer ones, because I couldn't find an exact replacement for the original sockets that screws into the bottom here. So, but I did find one that has a hole in the center, and luckily this has a hole in the center too, but it is slightly smaller than that that little threaded piece there. So I'm having to drill out these holes to make them a little bit larger so I can put that new socket in. The first box we made with 20 outlets controlled the floor lights. This box not only controls the floor lights, but also various props such as Rolf's applause sign, Billy Bob's gas pump, the spotlights for the sun, moon, and Beach Bear's guitar. I didn't finish installing all the floor lights until near the completion of my show in July of 2023, and didn't film much of it. I ran extension cords to each of the floor lights. I decided to do this because in the case I ever move the stage, I could easily unplug the cords, wrap them up, and reinstall them somewhere else.
Ken, are you excited that after 3 years you're finally soldering the last board?
That's not my fault.
This is what the finished top lighting controller looks like. The boxes for the top lights and spotlights used outlets that came out of the box, as it was too difficult drilling the holes in the first box. With the light bulbs, I wanted to use LEDs initially. LED bulbs are better in many ways. They consume around 1/8 of the energy that a typical incandescent bulb does. They also don't get hot and last far longer. However, there's one problem with them, and that is their abruptness. With incandescent bulbs, it takes time for the filament to heat up when they are turned on. However, LED lights turn on near instantaneously. And since the Rock-afire lights are constantly turning on and off, this abrupt flash does not look very good. However, I wanted to see if I could modify an LED bulb to turn on slowly, just like the incandescents. I used capacitors to do this. We came fairly close to getting this to work, but unfortunately there were still issues, and both cost as well as time to modify each bulb became a concern. I ended up just using the original style bulbs produced by Sylvania. With the spotlights, we needed to set up a unistrut bar that would hold all of them up. We had to hang the unistrut about 4 foot down from the bottom of the building trusses. And once that was done, I installed the spotlights and focused them on each of the characters' faces. Some of these were adjusted further after the video was taken. I used the original Altman spotlights, and these spotlights are around 500 watts each and get incredibly hot. Some of the last electronic elements on the show were the character valve banks, which had to be connected to the gray box. So I spent a few days going under the stage and running the cables. Luckily, none of the valve banks had any electrical issues. With that out of the way, the electronics and lighting were done. The lighting on the Rock-afire show is probably equally as important as the characters themselves. It makes the show extremely visually appealing, and without it, the show loses a lot of its magic. I'm very happy with how the lighting turned out on my show, and it wouldn't have been possible without the help of my friend Kanan, who helped me create the new lighting control systems and wired a lot of the lights. In the future, I may experiment with the LED bulbs again and see if I can make a suitable replacement for the incandescent bulbs.